Good evening, everyone. I'm Dorothy Klein. I'm the Executive Director of the Broward Public Library Foundation, and I'm so glad to see you all here tonight. I think you are going to have a great time hearing from all of these amazing authors talking about their work. LitLIVE is the first event of the Library Foundation's Literary Feast Weekend. The authors have flown in and driven in from all over the country to be with us this weekend so that they can talk to book lovers like you about their work. Tomorrow night, the authors will be the stars of the Night of Literary Feasts, attending a welcome reception at the Westin Fort Lauderdale Beach Resort, followed by intimate dinners. The dollars raised at the Night of Literary Feasts will provide more than 5,000 children's book giveaways, in addition to so many literacy programs held throughout the year for all ages. That's the work of the Library Foundation. We're fortunate that Nova Southeastern University is the presenting sponsor of LitLIVE. And here to say a few words to you is the university librarian, Jim Hutchins. Jim?
Move this back a little bit here. So first of all, before I start, I want to thank Dorothy Klein for everything she does. She's so easy to work with, and your support of the Broward County Libraries is just phenomenal. So on behalf of Nova Southeastern University, we are proud to serve as the presenting sponsor of tonight's LitLIVE panel discussions. Once again, we're treated with an outstanding group of authors. Earlier today, we were fortunate enough to host Deborah Goodrich Royce at the NSU Elvin Sherman Library, where she was fabulous. So that's really the first part of the weekend, I think. And now it's great to be with all of you alongside this incredible group of authors here at the Broward County Main Library. As a librarian for more than 30 years, wow, that's hard to believe, I can say with confidence that our community is served by a truly world-class library system. We have exceptional resources, strong countywide access, and outstanding leadership. Director Allison Grubbs and her team continue to meet the evolving needs of our community, and Allison is a tireless advocate for the residents of Broward County. She maximizes the impact of every dollar, but as we all know, public funding only goes so far. There's always a gap between what we're budgeted to do and what we aspire to do, and this is where the Library Foundation makes a difference. Through the Night of Literary Feast and other initiatives year-round, the foundation has raised literally millions of dollars to support the Broward County Libraries, and NSU is pleased to be a part of this effort. Thank you.
A little housekeeping. As you probably noticed, the books are on sale right outside the auditorium. Also, the Friends of Fort Lauderdale Libraries are selling wine, beer, soda, water, and snacks to keep you fortified for the next few hours. So, leading off this evening is the panel of 4 fiction authors. Guiding the discussion will be the moderator, Gail Bulfin, longtime veteran of moderating LitLIVE panels. Gail is with the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance. So enjoy the evening. We're ready to start.
Thank you, Dorothy. This truly is my favorite event of the year, so I know you're going to have a lot of fun listening to our esteemed panel up here. Just a little bit about how we'll proceed. We will hear a little bit from each of them about their books. I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll have about 7 to 10 minutes where you can ask questions. We have a mic down here on the floor. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. On my far left is ReShonda Tate. She's author, journalist, sought-after motivational speaker, award-winning poet. She's the recipient of the NAACP's Image Award for Outstanding Literature and was named to both the Arkansas Black Hall of Fame and the Texas Literary Hall of Fame. ReShonda graduated from University of Texas in Austin, was born in Missouri, and has a degree in broadcast journalism. ReShonda has written, and I may be wrong on all of you, but I counted 53 books.
This is my 54th.
Your 54 books.
So that was close. I wrote another one since you counted.
And 2 were made into television movies. Tonight we're going to talk about With Love from Harlem, so that is coming up. Hannah Pittard, to her right, is the author of If You Love It, Let It Kill You. Hannah has written 6 or 7 books? 6 books of fiction, including Reunion, Visible Empire, Listen to Me, and The Fates Will Find Their Way. Hannah is a winner of the Amanda Davis Highwire Fiction Award, a 3-time McDowell Fellow, and a Guy Davenport Professor of English at the University of Kentucky. She's a graduate of the University of Chicago and the University of Virginia, and lives in Lexington with her boyfriend and stepfather. And you'll kind of see that in the book a little bit, I think. Oliver Munday right next to Hannah, is a very well-respected and successful graphic artist. He's a fixture in the pages, was a fixture in the pages of The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Atlantic, numerous iconic book covers, iconic covers from Time magazine, and books including Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad. Oliver grew up in D.C. and studied at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore and lives in New York City. And he's the author of a book we'll be talking about tonight, a book of short stories called Head of Household. And finally, we have Chanel Cleeton, who is one prolific author, I think on either side. Again, I count 10 books for fiction, 9 contemporary romances, a thriller. How many total books have you written so far?
I think this is my 19th.
19th. She's a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author and a Reese's Book Club pick for next year in Havana. Chanel has her bachelor's degree in international relations from the American International University in London, a master's degree in global politics from the London School of Economics, and a JD from the University of South Carolina. But she was born in Central Florida and was inspired by many of the stories that she learned from her family with ties to Cuba. So Chanel, we'll start with you tonight.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about the lost story of Eva Fuentes.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you today. The Lost Story of Eva Fuentes is a really special book for me because I wrote it to really celebrate the power of books and the impact that they have in our lives. It's the story of 3 extraordinary women. The first one is Eva Fuentes, who's living in Cuba in 1900. She's a teacher, and she takes part in one of the largest cultural exchanges of its time. This was a real-life event where more than 1,200 Cuban educators traveled to Harvard to study for the summer. And while she's there, she writes a book, and that book ends up having a powerful impact for over 100 years. We next pick up the book in 1966 in Havana, when a Cuban librarian is asked to hold it for a neighbor who's fleeing the country and can't take things with her. And the librarian picks up the book at a time when she really needs it most, and it becomes such a formative experience for her. And then the book disappears for a little bit, and we encounter it again in the present day with a young American expat, Margot, who is living in London, and she's hired by a mysterious individual to track down this book. And she learns that there's only one copy in existence, and she has to discover why someone's so desperate to get it and why they're willing to go to such great lengths for this particular novel.
You can't put the book down. I'd highly recommend it. Oliver, you have a synopsis, or can you give us a synopsis of your short stories and your book?
I can try. Thank you for having me. I'm very thrilled to be here. This is Head of Household is a collection of short stories all about fatherhood, and I really set out to kind of write a book that I wished had existed when I was preparing to have a kid and when I was going through the sort of early stages of child rearing. For all of the, famous fathers in American fiction, there are very few novels and story collections that actually focus on the experience of fathering, and I think that there are a ton of social and political reasons for that, but we have seen that motherhood can be an incredible lens through which to look at experience, and a lot of those books inspired me very greatly as a reader, as a dad, just as a person in the world. So I wanted to try and write a book that redressed some of that and captured what it feels like to be a father, a man at this particularly precarious moment. And yeah, the men in this book are not, they don't set the greatest examples necessarily, but I think it makes for fun reading.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hannah, tell us about your book, please.
I did not mean to write this book. This is one of the books that I didn't sit down intentionally to write, but in 2023, I wrote a memoir, and it was the story of the dissolution of my marriage. I was married to a writer. He had an affair with my best friend, who was also a writer, and I didn't mean to write that book either, but in the time of COVID, I gravitated towards nonfiction. I couldn't make anything up. I didn't understand why a person would make anything up when outside the world was behaving in a very fictional way. And around the time that I was finishing the memoir and getting ready to do some publicity work for it, I got an email from my agent, and she communicates, I think a lot of agents might do this, or maybe it's just mine, but she communicates by way of subject line. So like everything that she's gonna say is in the subject line, and then like the punch comes in the, in the text, and it just said, "Have you seen this?" And I was like, ooh, what am I looking at? Like, have I won an award? No, I had not won an award. It was just a screen grab of the announcement of my ex-husband's debut novel, a description of his novel. And I was like, well, SOB, man, he's finally done it. And I read the description, and I was kind of speechless because the description of his novel matched the description of my memoir. So this threw me for a loop because I was like, so he's written a memoir too? What is this? I don't understand because what's going on? And no, he had written a novel, but he had fictionalized our marriage, but everything was in there, the infidelity, all of it. So I did what I think any OCD obsessive type personality would do. I sat down, and for the first time in 6 years, I Googled his name, and I truly had not done that in 6 years. And I Googled his name because I wanted to know as much as I could about this fictional novel, which would feature me prominently in a very negative way. I could find nothing about the novel, but what I did find was a story that he had published 4 years earlier in 2019 that featured a me down to like everything, like you just can't deny that it's me, who gets knifed to death. And I read this story with great interest. And when I got to the part where I was knifed to death, I was like, well, holy moly. I've been walking around for 3 years. I had no idea. And that very day, I sat down and I started writing about it, and they were just meant to be like funny little ditties, really. And these funny little anecdotes about this ex-husband who murders his ex-wife, and a work of fiction turned into this book. And it's, I steal a lot from my own life, but it's absolutely fiction. There is a talking cat, so it is not real. But it does begin with a kind of self-obsessed mid-list author, not unlike me, who discovers that her ex-husband has murdered her in a work of fiction.
There's a great line in that book. Speaking of
Thanks.
graphic art, there's a line in your book, the cover of his book has a big shadow, and your sister in the book says, well, who's this little person? It's your husband standing in the shadow of you, which kind of says a lot about his motivations.
And then she says, why can't he just move right over there out from under the shadow?
Right. Very interesting. ReShonda,
I
what a
can't go after Hannah.
Oh, yes, you can. What a beautiful book. Please tell us.
So With Love from Harlem is the story of Hazel Scott. It's based on the life of Hazel Scott. And Hazel Scott is one of the biggest jazz pianists and entertainers of her time. She was bigger than Billie Holiday, Sarah Vaughan, but she was erased from history. So With Love from Harlem is her story, along with her tumultuous marriage to Adam Clayton Powell Jr., who was a huge congressman of the time. It was based in 1940s and 50s. And when they came together, they were one of the most powerful couples in America. And the problem that happens is when two stars shine bright, one of them is bound to dim. And she dims her light for Adam. And if you know anything about history and Adam Clayton Powell Jr., he didn't dim his light for anyone. So it is his tumultuous story. They started out because she was the other woman, and he left his wife for her. And you know, if you leave your wife for the mistress, that means the mistress spot is now open. And now he filled it quickly. And so her life was filled with infidelity and drama, but it is also about her friendships with Billie Holiday, James Baldwin, Nina Simone. So it is her story and about reclaiming her life.
And Quincy Jones, I mean, it's unbelievable, that book. So back to you then. How did you discover Hazel?
So I was working on my research for my novel, The Queen of Sugar Hill, which was based on the life of Hattie McDaniel. And I discovered Hazel's name. And then I went and did a little research and was dumbfounded because I had never heard of her. She was the first Black woman to ever have her own talk show. And I grew up wanting to have my own talk show. So how did I not know this woman? And the more I found out about her, the more I said, I want to tell her story. I pitched it. My publishers loved it. And they said, here, go research it. I went digging, and the more I dug, the more I did not like her. I did not like her as I began doing my research because she was the other woman. I'm married, so I didn't like the other woman. But I had already spent my advance, so I had to figure out a way to like her. And then I gave her grace. She was 22 years old, being pursued by one of the most powerful men in America. And once I took that lens off, I looked at the time frame. She was one of the richest entertainers, but she couldn't have her own bank account because of the time. And so I gave her grace and then started researching. The more I researched, the more I said, this woman needs to be known. But she had an unpublished autobiography that I got from the Library of Congress. And that's how I got so much of the information. And it was unpublished because she wanted to take the high road and not give all the tea, if you will. So she only used initials. So she would say, I went to Paris and I fell in love with a young man named Q. Well, now I got to go down a rabbit hole and try and figure out who Q is. And I did. And so I would go down the rabbit hole, and I ended up finding out Q was Quincy Jones. So I would discover things like that and get excited. But the biggest thing were the letters. That's how they communicated. So she had so many love and hate letters that I was able to draw from. It's to the fact that I got so much information. When I finished researching, I told my kids, when I die, burn everything. I just take it out the cloud, because there was so much information that I'm sure she didn't think 100 years later some nosy girl would be in the Library of Congress reading it all.
It was fascinating, so I can't wait to hear some more about it. Hannah, I heard a description of your book as autofiction, and I had to look it up to kind of see what autofiction was, and I know it traces itself back to BC, although it was popular in the 1970s. Please explain autofiction and your book.
It has been around forever. It's absolutely been, yes, it goes way back. But it's basically fiction with an autobiographical bent. You take a character who is based somewhat on the author and you corrupt the author. For me, it's a way to live a life that is incompatible with the life that I've chosen to live. I am also, not married. I don't believe in marriage anymore, having been married, but I have a life partnership with a boyfriend, and there are things that in a different scenario, in a different world I would do, but I can't do because I like the contentment of my life and I like being faithful, but I have an active imagination, and I basically, and I think this is what other people do as well who write autofiction, they send sort of perverted versions of themselves out into fictional worlds and allow them to behave poorly and see what happens. And so it's a way for me to kind of have my cake and eat it too, I think. I get to have a pretty generic, normal life, but I send Hannah P., who's missing an H and missing an N, so she's like me, but she's missing a little something, like sanity, reason, good sense. And so I send her out and I let her do and say things that, you know, I fantasize constantly about doing and saying, but I would never do. I love to send Hannah to grocery stores to shoplift because I'm constantly at grocery stores, like thinking about, what about shoplifting? Like, I could just take an avocado. And so what I really do, real Hannah, will sometimes move things in a grocery store, which satisfies like a little bit of the itch. I'm just like, I could take it and put it there. You know.
That's awesome. That's great.
But it's fake. It's all fake.
And she
You're
has a
just-
wild imagination.
She does, yeah. I don't think that's a great example of what autofiction is, but like.
No,
yeah.
I think you did a good job on that.
Philip Roth writes autofiction. He rejected the term, but then he also said, I'm basically writing about myself. I mean, it's been around, you know.
So, Oliver, your book is often sort of confessions from Dad's points of view, a variety of situations. It was pretty eye-opening, pretty intimate in some of those short stories. How and why did you choose those men to tell those stories?
Before I answer that, I'm realizing something up here that I will admit now, is that I might have done your ex's book cover.
Is it a
Oh
blue
my
cover?
God.
Do you want my seat, Hannah?
the
You want to
shadow?
trade?
Oh my God.
Yeah, I did it. I'm sorry. It wasn't.
It's a really good cover. It's my
It's
favorite
not a
part
good
of the
book,
book.
though.
It's my favorite part of the book.
I skimmed the book and I was like,
Clean
"That's
it
not
up,
for me."
Oliver. Clean it up.
I'm serious. I didn't even really like the cover either. But when you said the shadow, I was like, oh no, this can't be real.
This is my best day ever.
Yikes. I'm sorry.
Oh my God. That is unbelievable.
Wait, what was the question again?
So you have a whole series of short stories
Yeah.
about
Oh, yes, right, to the bad men. Yeah.
bad men.
The bad men. Yeah. So I mean, in a similar way, I think while these are not autofictional stories, I think that there's something that Hannah said, which is, you know, to set a character loose that might resemble yourself or might have sort of, I think about it as a kind of like counterfactual, like things happen in life and then you imagine, man, what if I had gone, you know, all in on that, or you know, what if things had gotten really bad, and that what if usually leads to a kind of interesting narrative place. And so a lot of these stories grew out of my experience in small ways, and some are very close to me, but I wanted to try and explore the range of kind of masculine response to things that happen, you know, with kids and with partners and with infidelity and with financial anxiety and all the things that arise. And I think it was important to set that in a domestic context, because I think men have not really done that much in fiction. It's kind of, and even when my agent told me that I should focus on writing about fatherhood, I kind of balked a little bit. I was like, but that's going to be boring. Like, I don't want to do that.
Well, it's not boring.
Well, I had to figure out a way to make it not boring. But once I accepted that, it was a, I don't know, it led to lots of self-discovery, and the process with my editor, who I worked with very closely on it, it was very revealing, let's say.
Thank you. And Chanel, your book focuses on kind of three periods of time, 1900, 1966, and 2024. Why did you choose those, and what kind of research did you do to make that decision?
So I really love working with dual timelines. It's something I do a lot, and this time I have, or with this book we have the 3 timelines, but I love kind of looking at how the past informs the present. And so the idea of doing it this time in a different way by having a book be the link between the different timelines was really interesting to me. I had first come across the mention of the Cuban summer school when I was doing research for a novel I wrote several years ago, The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba. And that book was set during the fight for independence from Spain and the Spanish-American War. And it's a very difficult, tumultuous time in Cuban history. And in that time period, it was interesting to see that out of all of that was this event where these Cuban teachers came to the US and spent the summer at Harvard and studied. And really, it was a diplomatic effort because at that time, Cuba was under occupation by the United States. You know, they had achieved independence from Spain, but they still weren't fully independent. And so I was just fascinated by the juxtaposition of this really difficult time in Cuban history and then this diplomatic exchange and this cultural event that was really an effort for Cubans to kind of assert themselves on the global stage and to have this dialogue with the Americans as they wanted to be truly independent. And so it was something that stuck with me for a while. And I kind of, as authors, you file an idea and you're like, okay, at one book I will explore this a little bit further. And so I had that idea and I was trying to figure out exactly the angle that I wanted to tell with it. And that's when I came up with, you know, the idea of having a book be something that we kind of followed throughout history. And, you know, for the 1960s storyline, I have written quite a few books that are told from the Cuban perspective in the 60s being in the United States. So my fictional family, the Perez family that I've written about for my first few historical fiction books, they come to the U.S., you know, right after the Revolution. My own family didn't come to the U.S. until the late 60s. And so I wanted to tell the perspective more, the stories I grew up on, which were what it was like to live in Cuba, you know, in those years after Fidel took power. And so that was really why I settled on that time period. And then adding in the contemporary just kind of enabled me to stretch the storylines and to kind of show how this book has had longevity, as so many books do, to inspire and to reach people at different moments.
So back to you, and I'm going to ask you all a process question. You start the book in current times. Why did you decide to do it that way, and did you try other approaches?
So my writing process, I always kind of have a little bit of inward embarrassment when I have to describe my writing process because in my real life, you know, I'm very kind of analytical and business-minded. My literally only creative thing, like I'm not artistic, I'm not musical. The only thing I have that's kind of a creative attribute is that I love to write. And so I think I give myself a lot of freedom in that area to be kind of messy with it. You know, I don't really plot. I'm what we call a pantser. So often, you know, my first chapter will just come to me sort of in a character's voice, or I'll have an image of a scene that just feels very real to me, and I'll know that I need to put that on the page. And so with The Lost Story of Eva Fuentes, the opening chapter just came to me really vividly. I knew there was a book. I knew it was going to travel through time, you know, through a 100-year period, and I knew someone was looking for it. And so I just immediately felt like I was in that scene, and I sat down and wrote it, and I didn't really play around with where I started the book. I mean, that was always kind of where I wanted it to be the jumping point.
Very good. It's solid there. Oliver, at the end of each one of your stories, you kind of let things be interpreted by the reader versus resolving a situation. And you have, you know, a variety of situations with your subjects: a bereaved father, you know, a financially strapped divorced dad, a recently physically challenged father about to walk a daughter down the aisle. Why do you use that method, and what do you think it allows the reader to do when you don't solve the problem?
Maybe it's just because I don't know how to solve it. I think I believe in ambiguity, and I think that there is like the stories that I enjoy reading most kind of, they stop but you keep going as a reader, and I think that there's a way to do that that leaves a lot of interpretive space, which, you know, I as a consumer and processor art and media. Like, I just enjoy that. I enjoy that ambiguity and think that it is okay to not have things tied up in a neat bow in that sense. And I think what happens over the course, hopefully, of the book is that those impressions leave a kind of an impression of a whole that that is lasting. And I think that there are different ways that ambiguity functions in the stories. It's not just, scene goes black and, you're left to wonder. So, yeah, I think that it leaves a lot. It leaves a lot to kind of to wonder about and to imagine after you finish.
You definitely do. You leave those stories thinking about them a lot longer, I think. So Hannah, to tell the story of Hannah, you use a variety of methods. Hannah as the narrator, what Hannah thinks her husband, her sister, her parents, her students think, what the cat thinks. It seems to contribute to the whole chaos of what's going on in her life at that point. Tell us about your storytelling plan using those devices.
Oh, well, I was so happy to hear how you spoke about not having a plan, honestly. I get very intimidated with people who have plans. Like, I feel like you might have a lot of plans. You can't write 79 books. I'm just going to go ahead and add what you're going to do next year without having a plan. So I get very intimidated by that. I have no idea what I'm doing, which is wild because they let me teach. But I'm very honest with my students, especially my undergrads. The first thing I always say to them on the first day of workshop is, you're all doing something I've never done, which was have the guts to be workshopped in undergrad. I did not. I was writing already when I was an undergraduate, but I deliberately didn't sign up for workshops, and we had them, and I told myself at the time that I didn't need anybody's, point of view or feedback, but I know I was just terrified of their points of view and their feedback. So what happened with that book, I have no idea. I know that the day that the talking cat entered the narrative, so in my real life, I lack boundaries. I'm told this quite constantly. I don't have animals in my life anymore because my last dog died in 2017 and I still dream about him, and so you can't have another animal while you're still in love with your last one. But my neighbors moved in and they have a cat, and the cat is Milo, and Milo comes over to my front porch, and I live in Kentucky, and in the summer I live on my front porch, and the first year they moved in, I renamed Milo Mino. I don't know why, because he became my cat. And I also bought a cat brush, and I made sure it matched the color of my Adirondacks so that it was invisible to the neighbors so they could come out and I could hide it. Nothing to see here, folks. So Mino and I had gotten very, very close in the summer, and that's also where I write, on the front porch in the summer. And I was out there, and I had recently discovered that I had been murdered, and I was interested in writing about that, and I was in a giddy state of mind all summer because of having been murdered and still walking around, which presented me with lots of interesting opportunities. And Milo came over, and he wanted to do what he always does, which is jump up onto my lap, and I had to push him away, and he looked up at me, and the things this cat said to me, they were ugly, and I cannot repeat them on this stage. But I did look at him, and I was like, I think you just got into my book. And I wrote what he was saying to me, and I realized this is such a fascinating and perfect way to have this person who is clearly this character who's going through a kind of mental break, right? To have an opportunity for her to have a discussion with herself and to be mean to herself and to call herself out by way of this talking cat. So the cat came from a real cat, and that just I think that sort of is indicative of how I write. A cat walked onto my porch, and therefore there is a talking cat, and the cat is on the cover. So that's how much thought I put into my writing. which makes it seem like I don't think at all about my writing. In revision, every single word is deliberate. Every single word has been chosen intentionally. But on the way to the ending, I have no idea what's going on. There is always a moment, like an image, there's always a moment where I can see the end. And that is the greatest feeling for me as a writer, because it's just about getting there. And then once I've gotten to the end, the best part of writing begins, which is revision for me.
And the cat's pretty critical, and it's pretty funny.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
ReShonda, another process question for you. Your story is told chronologically, and Hazel lives in a variety of places in New York, in DC, in Paris, from Trinidad. What did you learn that you did not include in this book and would not advance the story?
So there was quite a bit. In fact, Adam, his bad behavior, most of his bad behavior ended up on the cutting room floor. So he was a whole lot worse than what you see, what makes it to the pages, which is
And he's pretty bad.
And he's pretty bad. So that, a lot with Billie Holiday. I loved telling Billie Holiday's story because we know the tragic Billie Holiday, the drugs, but this was the girlfriend, Billie Holiday. So I love telling her story, but a lot of her story made it to the cutting room floor because she wanted to take over the book. I had to keep saying, Billie, this isn't your book, go sit down. So I guess, the cat talks to you and Billie talks to me. But there was a whole lot. So I had to cut it off. I'm not writing a cradle to grave story. So I cut off in 1960. Hazel didn't die until the 70s. And so she remarried again. But I had to make a choice of where I'm going to stop the book. And so that's what I did. I found that place. But there was a whole lot that didn't make it. About her life, just to all of that she did, because she was blacklisted in L.A. because of movies, a stand she took. She refused to perform before segregated audiences. And so I could only put so much of that. Now, when you first write, everything goes in and it's crucial. But I always say, like Hannah, good books aren't written, they're rewritten. I do have a plan when I'm starting out. I use a program called Scrivener, and that helps me organize everything. And then I just put everything in, and then I go in the process of cutting down.
We could be up here talking for another hour. I have so many more questions, and I know that we were going to have time for questions. I think I'm getting the 2-minute. 2 questions. If there's anyone that has a question, otherwise I'll ask a real quick question. Okay, my quick question. What are you working on now? So we'll start with you, ReShonda.
So I'm working on a book called Daughters of the Steel. One of the things in my research that I discovered was women were a big foundation, a big part of the bootleg and moonshine industry. I was fascinated to find this out because women were dismissed. And so they would get arrested, and the judge would say, they're not smart enough to run a bootleg and moonshine. So case dismissed, and the women would go, I sure am not, Your Honor. And they'd go home and run their big distilleries. And so it's fascinating, the research that I came in, so I fictionalized that story, including one woman who was with an FBI informant sent to bring a man down, and she ended up marrying him so that she could not testify against him. So every time I come across this, I'm like, I'm about to put you in a book. And so I put them in a book.
Awesome. Hannah?
I have just finished, but it's not, nobody owns it yet, so that I think it's finished, but somebody's going to tell me it's not if I'm lucky, and then I'll be revising it for a while. But it's a literary thriller, kind of, involving public school and housing. It's like real estate, and which I love. I'm one of those people who looks at Redfin every day, and it's like, can you believe this? I just love it. So it's a literary thriller, and it takes place in a sort of made-up neighborhood in Oregon, where one of the best public schools in the country actually does exist. And it centers around this one house and 3 women who all think the house should belong to them.
Interesting. Oliver?
I am trying to sort of feel my way around a novel right now, but am loath to say much more than that for fear of jinxing myself. But I started writing by trying and failing to write novels and came to stories late. And so going back now and trying to flesh out a narrative is very daunting. So I'm not sure if I will make it till the end, but to sort of satisfy the more immediate itch, I just, when an idea pops up, I write a story, and so I can work on those things alongside.
Awesome.
So
Keep going. Chanel.
So my next book is going to be out on July 7th, and it's called An Infinite Love Story, and it's a bit of a departure for me. It is a book set during the 1960s space race, and so it's set during kind of a fictional, during the Apollo timeline, and it's basically the story of an astronaut's wife, and her husband is on a mission to the moon, and he goes missing, and then she starts receiving messages, and she starts beginning to wonder, what happened to him and if he could possibly still be out there.
Well, they all sound great. I know we'll all be buying them. We love you all. What a great job. On behalf of all of us, thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.